Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff. This is the week of November 19th, 2025, episode 108, entitled Israel, It's Not the Curriculum. And in a minute, I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. You might be able to guess, but in any case, before we begin, a little bit of front matter. First of all, I'm coming to you tonight, this broadcast from Israel. I'm back after a 6 week tour in the US. Really amazing to be back. I must say, it does feel like there's a different energy here. I was in the US when the hostages, remaining living hostages, were released. And so I didn't get to really soak up what that vibe was. I heard it was amazing. And obviously, knowing Israel and Israelis, that's what I assumed it would be. So I did miss out on that. But now that I'm back, I must say it does feel a little bit different. It does feel like the country is just in slightly somewhat of a different place now with those living hostages all back. We still have a few bodies that we're waiting to get returned to Israel, but the fact that the living ones are back in Israel, it does change just the sense of being alive here. And the first thing I noticed when getting off the plane at Ben Gurion, those of you who've flown to Israel over the past 2 years, you know that there had been this really dark but also beautiful and moving display of dog tags hanging down from the ceiling of the airport right when you exit the departure terminal, when you land. And that is no longer there. And I took a picture of that empty space where those dog tags used to be, because I had flown to the US numerous times since October 7th of 23, and every time I came back, there was that sort of haunting, that's the right word. There was that haunting dog tag display, which it's really wonderful that it is no longer there. So it really does feel a bit different being back. And I encourage all of you, maybe some of you were waiting to come, wondering when is the right time. Well, now is the right time to come here. I definitely would encourage you to come. We're in recovery mode, and tourism, not just economically, but just emotionally, to know for Israelis to know that you are out there and thinking of us and coming over here, it makes a huge difference. So I encourage you to do so. But in any case, really great to be back. And I don't feel like any time has passed at all in that sense. I'm right back into the swing of things, doing errands, driving carpool. Once you come back home, you're put to work immediately. Second order of business before we jump into our main topic is, believe it or not, but Christmas Eve is almost here. Yes, December 24th. Why am I talking about Christmas Eve on an Israel-oriented podcast? Well, as you may know, every Christmas Eve I produce a comedy show in New York City called Christmas Eve for the Jews. This will be the 15th year of Christmas Eve for the Jews. It's sold out every year, and tickets are now on sale. We have a great lineup. The headliner is Dan Natterman. He's been on Last Comic Standing, Letterman, The Tonight Show, pretty much anywhere you can name, he's been there. He's really fantastic. He's mostly clean as far as I can remember. Anytime I've seen him, he has been. So if you are interested in attending, come on out. That's December 24th at City Winery in New York City. And to get tickets, the easiest way is just go to my website, joelchasnoff.com. And right there, there's a big banner at the top of the page that says Christmas Eve for the Jews. Click the Get a Seat button, and you'll be taken to the tickets page. And I'm going to put a discount code in the chat for all of those listening live, but for those listening on audio, the discount code is Joel15, so Joel 15, and that will give you 15% off. That discount code is only good until Monday, the 24th of November, so less than a week at this point. So go ahead, do not delay. Joel15 to get your tickets for Christmas Eve for the Jews. All right, now on to our main topic. The title, as I said, of this episode is Israel, It's Not the Curriculum. And in a way, this title is an answer to one of the questions that I've been receiving most from listeners lately, which is more or less, why are so many Jews, particularly young Jews, anti-Israel, or at least not pro-Israel? Certainly not to the level that I was and many of you were when we were growing up. When I was growing up, it was a no-brainer that you were pro-Israel. I went to day school. I participated in the Walk for Israel every spring, hosted Israeli exchange students, went with my family, went with Ramah on seminar. I can't even say I knew all that much about Israeli politics. Certainly, the internet age and social media has made news about world events so much more accessible. But it was never in my mind to not be pro-Israel. I was Jewish. Israel's the homeland of the Jews. What is not to support? But the truth is, many young Jews today are not pro-Israel, and certainly a fair number of them are anti-Israel, by which I mean they're participating in protests against Israel on their college campuses. They're voting for Mamdani, some of them because they don't care about Israel enough to give heed to what he's been saying, and some because they actually believe he's right when he uses violent, extreme rhetoric against Israel. And a lot of us are finding ourselves asking the question, how did we fail these young Jews? Where did we go wrong? What were we teaching? And how could we have taught it better? And inherent to this question is the assumption that the curriculum is what would have made a difference. That if only we had taught Israel differently, then these young Jews would be pro-Israel, or at minimum, they wouldn't be anti-Israel. So I want to just approach this question from three different angles. And the first one is the thesis here, as I said, is almost always that we need a more nuanced curriculum, i.e., one that speaks about the Palestinian narrative, that mentions al-Nakba, which is how the Palestinians refer to Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. They call it the catastrophe. The idea here is that we should have been more nuanced, that the whole idea of a land without a people for a people without a land, that this was disingenuous, that we misled these young people into believing that Israel was something it is not, that we hid the violence and the crimes that Israel enacted on the Palestinian people. And the belief is that if only we had been more honest, if only we had told them the full truth early on, they would still be with us. They would still be pro-Israel because they wouldn't feel like they had been hoodwinked and sold a bag of goods. And I've been in serious conversations where this thesis is just accepted wholeheartedly, where very smart members of the Jewish community, leadership, are in a room talking about, well, just how nuanced do we need to go? How young is too young to begin to start telling the whole story? But the assumption over and over is that the curriculum was and is the problem, and that is what needs to be addressed. So my first takeaway of the three in this episode is that I'm going to push back on this, and I'm going to say it is not the curriculum. And in a way, I can prove it to you. What I would say is, I invite you to think of any topic that you have a passion for. Ideally, a subject in school that you really liked, but it could be some other topic or some area of interest in your life that you're really passionate about and have strong feelings for, that you really love. I would bet that your love for that topic has very little to do with the curriculum itself and much more to do with who was conveying that curriculum to you. Look, I grew up, it's no secret, with a really strong love for Israel, strong enough that I would move here after college and do the army, and then after 20 years in the US, return to Israel and settle down here with my family. I can tell you that my living here now and having done the army when I did, when I was 24, had nothing to do with the actual curriculum. There were no facts about Israel that ultimately pushed me to live here. My being taught a certain thing about what happened in 1948 or what the 67 borders are or where the green line is, that maybe had 5% impact on me. I certainly looked up to the idea that the Jews who were outnumbered were able to defeat these conquering armies that didn't agree to the partition of the land that is now Israel in November of 1947 and in May of 1948. I get definitely attached myself to that underdog story. But the actual curriculum itself, I don't think is what lit the fire for me in terms of my love for Israel. It was the amazing Hebrew teachers I had, who I've mentioned before. Ruti Halprin, Batya Retsky, Zichrona Livracha, at Solomon Schechter, Pnina Orbach at Solomon Schechter. It was the amazing Mishlachat, the Israelis I met at Camp Ramah. You know, David Karen was always the head of the Mishlachat, and he had such an impact on me. And not once did we ever talk about what you might call the curriculum of Israel. Instead, it was just his personality and his love for Israel that was contagious. And I'm also a math guy. I'm very into math. I minored in math in college. And I can tell you that my love for math had nothing to do with the curriculum over the years. It had to do with the fact that I had really amazing math teachers, specifically in high school, who just were able to convey not only the facts and the methodology of math, but the beauty of mathematics and how it explains so much in the world. Their enthusiasm was contagious. So I think number one is that we need to question this thesis that the curriculum is what needs to be changed when it comes to getting more young people on board for Israel. I'm going to say it's not the curriculum. That leads us to point number two. If we are going to agree that it's the teachers, the ones conveying the curriculum, that's what's important, then we need to take a step back and look at who is conveying the Israel curriculum right now. And what I'm about to say is not politically correct. In a way, it's not going to come as a surprise to you. I think it's the quiet part that we're going to say out loud. We live in an era where everyone is supposed to be equal and has equal gifts and needs to be honored for the people they are. And yes, that's all well and good and important. But at the same time, we shouldn't BS ourselves. A lot of our Jewish educators are not as inspiring as we need to be, and that's putting it kindly. And I just want to make clear who I'm talking about. I'm really not talking about the day school teachers, because that's a different, very small subset. Less than 90% of Jewish kids in America attend Jewish day school. So I'm not talking about the day school teachers. What I'm talking about are the Hebrew schools, the Sunday schools, all these sort of extra schools where parents, communities are trying to push a little bit of Judaism and Israel into their children's heads. The people teaching in Hebrew schools and Sunday schools have not struck me, by and large, as inspiring at all. For a lot of them, I get the idea that they're teaching Hebrew school to make ends meet, that it's one more extra job they can pick up for which there is a low bar of entry. And believe me, it pains me to say this. I'm not trying to put people down, but we got to be honest here. And I say all this based on experience, both as someone who sometimes works with teens. You know, as I tour around, I'll do teen programs here and there. And I see who their teachers are and who's running their classrooms before I step in. They don't strike me as very inspiring. the teachers, the ones that we have entrusted to bring Judaism on to the next level. I've also heard this from the directors of education at synagogues. They talk about how hard it is to find people to hire to teach Hebrew school, that people don't have a very high bar of knowledge, and that they don't have the passion that they would like to see. They talk about how much of the job is just classroom management, kids goofing off, not wanting to be there. And these poor teachers are stuck in a situation where they can't even teach. They have to manage the classroom, which they're often not very good of, and they end up getting walked all over. So I think we need to acknowledge, or at least pay attention to the idea that maybe what we need is not necessarily a different curriculum. What we need are different teachers, a new cohort of teachers to convey this curriculum. Because the bottom line is we're entrusting the Jewish future to them. So why would we not try to get the best possible teachers in there? I mean, look what Hebrew school teachers are paid. Does it surprise you that you're not getting the best teachers in there? And again, this doesn't go for everyone. I'm sure we can find outliers. But for the most part, the people teaching Sunday school and Hebrew school do not knock me dead with their passion, knowledge, control of the classroom, and the other tools and skills you would expect in an outstanding teacher. So that's takeaway number 2. Takeaway number 3. What's the solution then? Well, I spent some time thinking about this. This might sound crazy, but I feel the solution we need is the one that they use in professional sports. You know, in professional sports, they start scouting talent at a very young age. You know, LeBron James, he was known to be a superstar when he was 14, 15 years old. There are players in the Major League Baseball system right now who were scouted in the Dominican Republic when they were 13, 14 years old. So I think we need a similar scouting system in the Jewish world. And I'm going to say right up front, money is not the problem here. I'm going to throw some monetary figures at you, and you might think, wow, that's really expensive. But relative to Jewish philanthropy overall and how much money is out there in the Jewish world, the figures I'm going to put out are really not that high. So let's remove money as part of the conversation here. What I think we need to do is find and identify the best potential Jewish leaders at a young age. And I don't think it's that hard to do. I've been in plenty of summer camps. I've been in plenty of day schools and Hebrew schools, enough to say that you can pretty much immediately get a sense of who the really passionate, knowledgeable kids are. The future rabbis, the future day school principals, teachers. They're the ones who just get it. They're the ones to whom Judaism speaks to them. And look, I say this personally. I was one of those kids. Like, Judaism just made sense to me. I caught on Hebrew, trope, reading Torah. Like, it just clicked with me almost immediately. And there are other kids out there that I've met who are like this and who are out there now. And we need to identify them when they're at a young age. And I don't think it would be that hard for classroom teachers and camp counselors and camp directors to do this. Number 2, we need to then get them in the system. For example, what if we were to find 1 or 2 kids at a particular camp or Hebrew school who really, or day school, who really just seem to have the Jewish gene, you know? What if we were then to offer them from the fund that we set up to pay their day school tuition in full and to send them to Israel as a teenager for a 6-week program, not birthright for 10 days, but for a 6-week program of study, and maybe to fund a gap year in Israel. So yeah, we're putting a lot of money into them. Probably about $500,000 per kid when you add up the day school that we'd be paying for, the Israel trip, the maybe some classes over the year, and maybe that gap year program I mentioned. So let's say $500,000 per kid. If we can identify 100 children like this per year, that comes to $50 million a year, which I know sounds like a very high amount. But relative to the amount of money we're putting into all these other Jewish projects that make only a little bit of impact, if any at all, $50 million to earmark the very best potential future teachers and leaders and rabbis and cantors does not seem like all that much to me relative to the rest of the amount of money in that pool. And of course, they would then owe something in return. They would agree to work in the Jewish world for, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, maybe 10 or more. And we would supplement the salary of wherever it is that they're working. But what we're doing here is we're taking the best and the brightest and we're funneling them into the system in giving them more of what they already want. Again, this wouldn't be a struggle. These are kids who already show a love for Judaism, a passion for it. They have that knack for understanding, for reading Hebrew and catching on, for understanding and being able to read Torah. They just have it. And so we're not forcing them to do something they don't want. We're just giving them more of what they already want. These are kids who theoretically already want to work in the Jewish world. It could be that what's turning them off is the low salary or the barriers of having to deal with a very tough Jewish population. I know a lot of rabbis who've told me the hardest part about being a rabbi is dealing with Jews. We're tough. So we could give them that kind of support too, to keep them in the Jewish world. My point is that we need to find them young and then make it really easy for them to stay in the Jewish world. And that means financially and also the emotional support they would need. And what we've been doing instead is reacting. That when we see problems, we say, we got to fix the curriculum, or why are there no rabbis enrolled right now in rabbinical school? I don't know if you've seen the stats, but we're at a low point for the number of people actually enrolled in rabbinical school at HUC, at JTS. So we need to stop reacting, and instead we need to get ahead of this. And I think this is a Jewish problem in general. Like even with Israel PR, our whole problem is that we're reacting to what the other side is doing and trying to catch up instead of really being forward thinking and coming up with our own solutions. Well, what I'm offering you right now is really an innovative solution. And the only thing holding us back from doing it is the lack of central communication in the Jewish world. We have so many Jewish organizations, each with their own arm, their own tentacle. There's no sort of central body where we can make the best decisions for the Jewish people moving forward. But look, if it were up to me, that's what I would do. I would scout out the future talent, help fund their Jewish education, and then expect some sort of commitment in return. And that way we would know that we were getting top-notch leaders, teachers, rabbis, etc., and not just leave it to, I would say, chance, but it's even worse than chance. Given what we pay Jewish professionals now in these roles, you're really almost inviting a lower level of candidate to even take these jobs in the first place. And again, I hope I'm not offending you guys by saying this. You probably know Hebrew school teachers, and I'm not talking about the person you know, but I'm talking across the board. We really need to examine who we are entrusting the Jewish future to. We're going to move on now to questions. I had quite a few this week. First, we'll start with a couple of comments. This one is from Elias. So last week, Elias argued that if Israel executed convicted terrorists with the death penalty, that it might actually reduce Hamas's motivation to kidnap Israelis. And I argued back. I said, actually, that wouldn't reduce their motivation because Hamas would just want to kidnap Israelis and Jews anyway. But Elias wrote back. He wrote this. He said, no, you misunderstood my reasoning. I know that Hamas militants long to be martyrs. My point is this. One of their main reasons for taking hostages is to exchange hostages for Palestinians who are held in Israeli jails. However, if there were no imprisoned terrorists left to trade, if there were no imprisoned terrorists left to trade because they'd been executed, there would be less incentive for future kidnappings. Okay, so I see your point, Elias. That actually might be a valid point. At the same time, I think we need to accept that Hamas and other terrorist organizations simply hate Jews and Israelis and will do anything to ruin us that they possibly can. They will do any violent action against us that they can. Kidnapping, murder, suicide bombings. So to think that there's anything that would in any way interrupt their calculus, I just don't agree with it. Although I can see your point that they might need to strategize differently if they knew there weren't any prisoners to be released. But let's not forget who we're dealing with. Art wrote in, he said, "Hi, Joel. Regarding a recent podcast discussing the so-called two-state solution, you noted that most Israelis no longer believe in or want a two-state solution. It would be helpful to say that the Palestinians don't want it either." And all I can say is, Art, you are 100% correct. And you actually raised sort of a red flag here that too often we talk about the prospects for peace in the Middle East as if there were no other side who really, really hates us and who really doesn't want peace. Look, the majority of Palestinians in the West Bank support Hamas. Most Gazans do not want Israel to be here. So it's not like this other side is begging for a two-state solution and we're the ones deciding whether or not to give it to them. You bring up an excellent point, Art. I'm a little embarrassed and ashamed that I didn't think to say this myself, but you are correct. We shouldn't just assume that the other side wants a two-state solution and it's up to us. From what we can tell, they really don't want it. Nor have they. Sam writes in, regarding Mamdani, the Mamdani campaign was focused on the main point of cost of living. Most voters do not care if he is pro or anti-Israel. They live in New York, not Israel. They're thinking about their own cost of living. However, he writes, the cost of living becomes a dangerous issue if a presidential candidate were to say that we need to stop funding Israel as a way to use these funds here at home. This could be a winning argument whether you're on the right or the left, because most people care more about cost of living than about Israel's policy toward Israel. Okay, that is a good point, and one we need to take into account. It also relates to what I said last week, that my real big fear about Mamdani is not necessarily a drop in security. It's that it's now legitimate to talk about Israel publicly the way he does. And I think it's also legitimate now to talk about defunding Israel. And that is a very bad thing for Israel. So I appreciate you for bringing in that point, Sam. Ellie wrote in, or though it might be Eli. My wife and I are returning to Israel. It would be my wife's first trip to Israel ever, and my second. I will be volunteering for Sar'el, which is the IDF program for adults, and my wife will be on a Momentum women's trip with people from Shul and other synagogues across North America. I was wondering if, as an Israeli, you could tell us about a few special places you would suggest that we visit. By the way, he says, your book, Israel 201, was very fun. I'm reading it right now in planning for my trip. Well, thank you very much, Ellie/Eli. Okay, I've thought about where would I send you on your trip to places. Beside the usual Western Wall, Masada, Golan Heights, Tel Aviv at night. Two things came to mind. Number one, there are underground tunnels at the Western Wall. And this is part of a new exhibition where they dug and found this whole network of, first of all, an extension of the Western Wall that goes down several 100 feet. But also there's a tunnel network next to the Western Wall that was really a part of the community and shows you how Jews lived way back then around the Second Temple era. And you can take tours of these underground tunnels near the Western Wall. So that would be number one. Just Google Tunnel Tour Western Wall Jerusalem, and you can find tickets and times and information. But that would be a great tour to do. Number two, I would send you to Mitzpe Ramon, which is the Ramon crater in the south of Israel. The Negev, the desert, is my favorite place in Israel. I love the desert. I love the quiet of it. I love the serenity, especially in a place like Israel. It's just such a great escape. So I would send you to Mitzpe Ramon. It sounds far away. It's really only about 2.5 hours from Tel Aviv, even less from Jerusalem, but you really do feel like you're on another planet. And while I was there, I would recommend taking a Jeep tour. That's what I did with my family. We did this past summer. We went down to Mitzpe for 2 nights, took a Jeep tour, and actually drove into the crater itself and got really fascinating explanations about the geology and how the crater was formed and how it will look in another million years from now. I mean, talk about long time horizon. But those are the two places I would tell you about: the tunnel tour next to the Western Wall and Mitzpe Ramon, which seems so off the beaten path. But again, it's only 2 hours from Tel Aviv, less from Jerusalem. And just it allows you to feel like you're in such a different place than everyday Israel, which is nice once in a while. I would also say the Nova related sites in the south. Although I can also understand if you want to go there, it's probably very painful. You've read so much about it, heard so much about it that it certainly would be jarring to go there. I have not been there myself. I've driven past it. I've seen the signs. I've seen how it's become a tad bit touristy. That's not to say it's not important to go. I think it is, but I can also understand if you would choose not to. But that's certainly an option as well, especially if you're in Mitzpe Ramon. You're sort of already south, and you can make that eastern drive to the Nova and Gaza border area. I think I guess what is also important about that area is just seeing how close Gaza is. I mean, there are parts of the south, many parts of the south, where you drive on the highway and you see Gaza. And I think it really drives home just how close this enemy is, how close this war is, and that this is not some conflict 7,000 miles away like America might be blessed with, but this is literally our backyard and very close to home and such a threat to us on a day-to-day basis. And being close to the border and seeing how close Gaza is can really drive that point home. That wraps up this episode of Inside Israel. Join us next week for the live broadcast. That will be on Sunday. We're going back to Sundays, November 22nd, 2025. It'll be at 12 noon Eastern Time. So that's Sunday, November. It's Sunday, November 23rd. Yeah. Sunday, November 23rd at 12 noon Eastern Time. And I'll send out the link and the exact timing and the info in my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic. If you're not signed up for that, please do so at joelchasnoff.com. And reminding you also that this is the time to get your tickets for Christmas Eve to the Jews, our Christmas Eve comedy show, 15th year. I'll be hosting, by the way, so we can hang out that night as well. Dan Natterman headlining, joelchasnoff.com. At the top of the page, you'll see a banner which will take you to purchase tickets, code Joel15 for 15% off. Thank you so much for tuning in this week to Inside Israel. I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, thanks for joining everyone, and lehitraot.